Good evening. It's what is it? Tuesday, the 6th of June. We're at Amenities Committee. Start with agenda item 5623. Does anybody have any declarations of any disclosable pecuniary interests? None. Thank you very much. 5723. Do we have any apologies for absence?
We have a full house.
Thank you. I have had an email from the Mayor to say he can't come. So he's a member of all committees, of course, but he did email in to say he couldn't come. 5823, minutes from the last Amenities Committee. These are the ones from the 5th of April. Some of you wouldn't have been here, of course, but those of you that were here, are you happy that they're a true record?
Yes.
Yes. Good. Thank you very much. Approved. And moving on to the Cemetery Committee. This is a memory test because these are the ones from the 11th of November. And there's even a few of you there. Who we got? Dennis, no. Dave, no. Chris, are you happy with those minutes?
Yep.
From way back in November. Lovely. Thank you very much. So that's both sets of minutes approved. We'll move on to item 6023, Cemetery Officers Report. Good evening, Kerry, and welcome. Thank you very much for coming along tonight. Your report, I think, was circulated in the pack. Yes. Do you want to sort of highlight any sort of key bits of information for us?
The main thing really is to do with the memorial benches, and obviously the costs are going up all the time because when we did the original policy, we actually quoted a figure on there, and obviously we can't stick to that now. So I don't know whether we can look at it and change it so that we can say price available on request, because the quotes can only be held for 14 days.
Yeah, seems logical. I mean, we don't make any money from it as such.
No,
we just use to cover the cost, doesn't it? So I'm sure it goes, well, I would say up and down, but it's mainly going up. So sort of members generally content that we're sort of flexible pricing arrangement. We don't get too many of these memorial bench series.
Too many.
Okay.
Just one. I'm a bit surprised we don't make any money on it.
We don't make a profit. So there's a contribution towards installation and then upkeep and maintenance for a period of 5 years. Or
it's 5 years, yeah.
So that's all included in the price we charge, and then after the 5 years, we sort of take it on.
We don't make a profit out of selling benches. Okay.
No.
But I think if we benchmark that across other councils, you find they all do.
Well, we have a memorial bench policy. There's a policy for everything, and it comes up for a review reasonably often. I'm thinking every 2 years, Kerry, doesn't it?
It is, yeah.
So that's worth making a note of that, and you know.
Thank you.
Is there anything else, Kerry?
Just about the notice board as well. So obviously when we spoke the last time, you mentioned about having it so we could change the times as and when we need to. So they've come back to me to say that the cost for the 3 notice boards is £345 plus VAT, plus £60 plus VAT for the things to be able to change the times. So I don't know if you're happy to go ahead with that.
I think when we spoke about this previously, we wanted the design circulated or the text circulated to members. Are we still able to do that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, because the notice boards at the cemetery still have King's House as the office and the phone number and stuff, don't they? So
Yes,
we do want to get these done fairly quickly.
Yeah.
So if we could circulate the design to the committee, but generally speaking, we're happy with the cost. Yeah.
It's all so the reason for changing the opening and closing time. Where else are those times advertised? Are they on the website?
Yes, it is on the website.
And what, in terms of changing the times, what kind of situation would that be in?
So it's normally so it's winter and summer opening hours, and in previously it used to close at 7 in the summer. But obviously it's 4 o'clock in winter.
Okay, that's why I just making sure it wasn't like on the fly, kind of changing it week by week. If you
Yeah, no, it's not.
Okay, I see.
Chris?
This is still open till 7. No.
It's still 4 at the moment, because I thought it went to finance, and I think it was sent back to cemeteries, I believe.
This is,
I don't.
Are we still using the external contractor for opening and closing?
Yes, we
at
are.
the moment? Haven't had anybody complaining to me about that for a while, and I haven't seen anything on Facebook, but presumably that's running well at the moment.
Yes, yeah, I'm not aware of any issues.
I've had several.
Oh,
They've been bent on several.
good.
By certain people saying we've gone round after work and we can't get in. You told us we were going to leave the cemetery, which is what we agreed. Instead of back on Saturday, why hasn't it happened? Can you find out what's going on? So
we were quite keen as a past cemetery committee to look to employ somebody direct. So just for the benefit of new members, it's an external contractor at the moment. And there were forever issues with the cemetery not being opened when it was supposed to be opened, a few occasions of people being locked in. And we were quite keen to employ somebody direct. So I think that's something we need to revisit as a committee. Gives us more control over what they do when they're there. But at the moment, it's still the contractor. Presumably, Alan, is that still tied in with the toilets contract, which is due to end at the end of the year anyway?
it is.
Okay, good. Just having a quick look. Anything else, Kerry?
No, they're the main bits that I want to talk to you about.
Does anyone have any questions for Kerry about the cemetery? That's been very kind. I've got a question for you. The groundwater monitoring that we do, I noticed in the budget this year, for this financial year, we've budgeted £7,000 for groundwater monitoring, which is a significant sum of money. This might be a question for Alan, it might be a question for you, so feel free to share it around. Do we appoint people on a yearly basis to do that, or is that under a contract for a certain number of years?
I believe it was on a contract for a certain number of years.
Okay.
It hasn't been renewed or renegotiated, but they also haven't put up the prices.
Okay.
So they've kept it at pre-COVID prices.
So I've been reading a lot of the paperwork related to groundwater monitoring, and I was intrigued when I was a member of a cemetery committee why we do that. We've had consistent returns showing that for years now that the burials are not affecting the groundwater, and we can evidence that with huge chunks of data. So I would be keen to write to the Environment Agency and say, given this evidence, we're not going to undertake groundwater monitoring anymore, because in the licence from them, it's not a requirement, and it just seems to be an unnecessary expense to me. They're quite happy for lots of other stuff to go in the river.
Worth a try, I think.
I think it's worth a try, and because this all links to the cemetery extension, and we had to, undertake monitoring for a period of time. The cemetery extension's been in place since 2016,
2012, I believe.
2012. Maybe the monitoring has been in place since 2016. And we're working to a management plan for the extension, which expired in 2022. So the management plan itself actually has lapsed. So I think in the first instance, if we write to the Environment Agency and say we're going to stop that, and then see what response we get. But if we could just put that company on hold for this year until we find out what the EA say. I don't want them going and doing a load of work unnecessarily. Would the committee be happy with that?
So just one question on that. Is the water monitoring related to the amount of burials we're allowed to conduct?
Yeah.
Because, it makes no financial sense, both cases.
Chris?
I can on a bit reticent with this one. We had to bring in this monitoring because the fact that that site is an allotment site. Therefore, there's an awful amount of phosphates, is that right, in the ground?
I believe so.
And then there was an aquifer, is that?
Yes.
The river that runs underneath, and has actually moved its course over time. And were we legally bound to do this to make sure we had this amount of our 70 interments?
Yes.
I'm not convinced that the issues with the ground have gone away. And I would really hate for us to stop it.
Mm.
And then further down the line, something comes back and hits us really bad. Because we all know the amount of fertiliser, et cetera, that was piled into this area, bits and pieces. And I would be really rested if we could possibly not do it 4 times a year.
We do it twice a year at the moment.
Right, so twice a year. So, yeah, probably. I mean, I wouldn't be against that. And I think, as Adam, you say, it's an expense, but it could protect us.
From what?
It's done. From what?
Yeah.
It'd be sucked in the soil, I suppose, and not being able to bury someone. If they come along and do a spot check and they say your sulfate level's there, the way you can't do any more tunnels, we're silly, not we?
Okay, Carla?
I just wanted a bit of clarification because I was on the cemeteries committee before, so all this is really new to me. You mentioned that they do it twice a year, this inspection to the water levels, and 7K per year, not for, okay. You said that according to environmental guidelines, it's not necessary that it is twice a year, is that right?
We,
Or is there a minimum that is required for councils to do it? That's what I'm trying to understand.
I think that's what we need to challenge the Environment Agency. How frequently do you think we should be doing this? We, at the outset, when we sought the licence from them, we offered to do it twice a year. We've now got 5 years of evidence to show that the number of burials has had no effect on the nitrate levels.
Okay.
Therefore, can we reduce it? And by which amount of frequency would you be happy with? I think that's the question we need to be asking.
And there's consistency, there's no change in circumstances in the levels for 5 years straight. So there hasn't been any change, there's nothing affected, there's nothing, no concerns at all.
Yeah.
That's quite consistent for 7 days. It's about the value from, about what we get for what we pay.
Yeah.
I suppose it is quite an expense.
Thank you. Doug?
Further than that, did we have any monitoring before the extension was in place? So we've got a benchmark of what it was like before. I'm talking reality issues because I don't know the exact details. But
I don't believe so.
I'm not sure. We have to go back into our archives up here to find that type of information.
yeah,
You can tell I'm pushing the realms of what's possible. So I think at this stage, what we're looking at is writing to the Environment Agency to seek some guidance and an update from them. Things have moved on.
Yeah.
And then perhaps, Alan, if you're happy to liaise with Kerry and we have some sort of update report at the next meeting, even if we reduced it to 1 a year or 1 every 2 years. Yeah, that's what we're looking at. Okay, you happy with that?
I think just one other point if I may add is that it's the industries down the road are actually drawing water from that aquiflow that goes underneath the cemetery, and that's why they've asked us to do some of the monitoring. So we just need to clarify that as part of that exercise you just asked us to do.
Yeah, but that's why I was saying if we can substantiate it for 5 years straight, that nothing's been affected. It would be affected from 6 months to the next 6 months is very unlikely. So even if we skip once a year, it's already saving like.
Yeah, I think we can quite easily demonstrate that our use of that land as a cemetery extension is not impacting the nitrate levels. Basically, is what I'm getting at. So that is really an agreement to get some more information. It's not an agenda item. We're not making a decision tonight, but it'd be useful to get some more information on that particular point. Does anyone have any further cemetery-related questions? No, thank you very much, Kerry. What we'll try to do is, because cemetery used to only meet 3 times, 4 times a year, and if it's now merged in with amenities, we probably don't need to make you come every month.
Okay.
Is what I'm getting at. So, there are key times in the year of the cemetery, and we'll work out a sort of work plan rather than, having Alan, you, Nick, Karen, everyone else here.
Okay.
but we'll liaise with you about when you think it would be best for you to come along and present.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Okay, moving on to item 6123, Town Team Managers Report. For those of you returning committee members, you'll know that the highlight, one of the highlights, sorry Alan, finance stuff is always interesting. One of the highlights is Nick's Town Team Managers Report. He was due to be here tonight, but something's come up and he can't be here. But as usual, he has circulated his report in advance. So there's always a lot of information there about what the town team are up to. It always prompts questions and comments, but gives you a really good flavour for what they're doing each month, basically. Then separately tonight, we've got some decisions to make that flow from that report, and they're very helpfully listed separately. I won't do it justice if I go through it, but having read Nick's report, does anyone have any specific questions or comments that they want to make?
I have a question on the bins regarding Nick's report.
Yeah.
It's not so much, there's a bin down by Mill Lane that's alongside the river. It's difficult to get to. It's behind a tree stump, very near to a tree and overgrown around it. I've asked before if we could have that bin moved forward. We look at getting that done.
Yep. As you'll know, Nick's now got this really cool inventory of all the street furniture. So the first thing he would do is find out if it's a Breckland bin or ours. But if you email into him, I'm sure he'll be able to tell you straight away. And if it's ours, it's relatively simple. If it's somebody else's, it's a bit more complicated.
I'll email it tomorrow. Okay.
Okay. Alan, is there anything from Nick's report that you particularly wanted to highlight? It's really just a good overview of what they've been doing.
I think just the one, I think just before he left today, I think they have found the bollard that was at the bottom of King Street that went missing. It wasn't found in the river, so that hopefully Norfolk County Council will be returning that and putting that in place, so it's not actually moved on a regular basis, as has happened in the past.
Okay. And it said in the report that the hanging baskets will be going up week commencing 5th of June.
Yep.
Is that still the case?
He phoned them yesterday. I didn't hear the full results, but he didn't cry or curse. They do start this week, is my understanding.
Okay.
I still have one more.
Go on, Chris.
Regarding the town report. Highly successful bank holiday weekend. We had major issues with the bins on Farnham Common, on Castle Park. Overflowing, there was glass over there. So we have no one to go in and clean up over busy bank holiday periods. Can we look at possibly putting something in place? Lightning team out to whip out and sort things out. Because it was really dangerous. There's a young family were playing by the third bench down by the path, and underneath it was all glass.
Yep. I'm hoping, Mike, as chair of Heritage and Events, one of your first agenda items will be to review whatever events have come before that meeting. And the continental market, presumably, you'll have a bit of a wash up to see, you know, what worked really well and what could be improved as a sort of process of constant review. And I think Chris's point there is really valid. That was our own event. And we should, as the event organisers, be making sure we communicate, one, with Breckland to make sure they've got enough staff on at the weekend to empty the bins, but then also having our own staff on standby in places like Castle Park to be able, because we're essentially encouraging everybody to come to the town centre to spend money, but we've got to make sure those sort of things are dealt with. And I'm not sure that happened this time. As an observer looking in, are you happy with that?
First of all, thank you very much for adding to the agenda, which I'm all in favour of. I encourage everyone to chip in. And as it happens, the agenda will probably be set tomorrow. So the timing is superb. So the answer is yes.
Good. And I think, I just finished that a little bit. And you'll have noticed we've got a separate agenda item later to talk about toilets for that same reason. When organisations like the Fair request from us use of the land, we need to start thinking about toilet provision or charging an additional fee that we have our own people available to go around and, you know, do the cleaning. And that's so it's about coordination, really, isn't it? So, but noted and agreed. Thank you. Yeah.
A separate point.
Yep.
I often make points about the skate park, so I'm a regular visitor to the skate park.
Oh.
And I noticed the damage to the hedge around the skate park. When I'm not doing kind of double backflips and things on my scooter, I am watching birds, and they often use that hedge, and I think it's coming along nicely. I've never seen damage to the hedge before, so I would really like it if that hedge was fixed rather than us replacing the whole thing with a metal fence of some kind. I've never seen damage to the farmer's crops. I was really convinced by the argument. So I hope that we're doing our best to avoid just ripping out the hedge and putting it in the way.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just finish off the report and then we'll move on to the 3 decisions, and the skate park is the first of those 3. So any other questions or comments about the actual report? Nope. Okay. So the first one then, 6223, 1 is the skate park. To consider how to address the vandalism of council and neighbouring properties at the skate park raised in the town team manager's report, including the erection of fencing to enclose the site. Decision required to determine how best to safeguard property and how to fund the agreed corrective action. I didn't think when I spoke to Nick about this, it was a question of a hedge or a fence. Was the fence going to go around the hedge, do we know?
What he's done is, there's 2 things that he's done. Firstly, he has got quotes just to see if we could fence it in, because I think the deterioration in behaviours is a relatively recent occurrence. It hasn't, a year ago we weren't talking about this, it's only in the last few months. I think the other thing that we've done is we've also just gone to Norfolk Constabulary to get some ideas from them as to how do we get fences. Because what we're worried about is that the farmers' field is going to get more and more damaged as time goes on, and will we be liable? I mean, I've unfortunately been at the office during lunchtime and had to pick up the phone and had the academy's caretaker, kind of shouting down the phone because they've also, they've been affected by it. And that's really what's driving this particular item. So it's a matter of, do we get advice from Norfolk Constabulary, or do we, we've got quotes for the fencing. I don't have them with me, unfortunately. Nick would have brought them with him. But it's just, we have to do something, I think, otherwise that facility is going to get ruined for the majority of people that actually do use it.
Okay. Hazel?
So are we talking about fencing around where the farmer's field is, or like enclosing the whole thing and having opening times?
I don't think we want to. I don't think the intention was ever to protect third-party property. So I don't think it was a full enclosure with a lock and key and a night watchman type thing.
So when you say the academy land is being impacted, where is that, the car park bit, or where is it actually the vandalism on the school taking place?
They've just phoned us and said to us that they've had some issues. So like I said, I personally answered the telephone and had the caretaker doing that. We're working with them. So what we try to do is get Norfolk Constabulary to go get they actually have a camera that overlooks part of that area. We try to get them to work with Norfolk Constabulary so Norfolk Constabulary can see what is the extent of the problem and the frequency of the problem. But we're also just a little bit worried, that they might put a claim against us for damage to their property, which is something that we have had issues with previously.
Yeah, because the cost of the fence seems like quite a high cost, when it could be the case we've got CCTV in place and we can figure this out through the police instead.
Yep. I don't know how many of you have been to the skate park recently. Obviously you have. I went this morning to familiarise myself with it, and because the cost of this fence is reasonably significant, isn't it? It's
the latest pricing is actually not as high as we were started at a figure of about £10,000, and apparently it's not less than that figure.
Less than 5?
It's probably around 5.
I'm trying to gauge where your expensive and my expensive is, but because if you go further down past the skate park, down Joe Blunt's Lane, you can access the field anyway. So even though we're looking to enclose the skate park, there is still very easy access to the farm's field, literally just by going around the corner. So I'm not adverse to spending money, but I just don't think it will solve the problem, is probably what I'm getting at. So I do think it needs a bit more thought behind it. What I did think we could do in the short term, there's a few things up there that we should be doing. There's a number of holes in the ground. I know the concrete basin itself has been fixed relatively recently, but there's an awful number of sort of health and safety issues, sort of holes in the ground that need to be filled in. The solar panels that are there are completely covered in dust and bird's mess. I'd imagine there's an issue with them working in some cases. They're so covered. I took some photos today. And I'm not sure, I assume it's the academy, but the fence line between the car park and the skate park, there's huge holes. And if that's our responsibility, I absolutely, I think we should be repairing that. If it's the academy, I think maybe we ought to have a conversation about sorting that out. Just check my phone because I took some photos today.
I was going to say I saw that hole between that car park. Is it because people using the skate park are parking there and then we
think
get
so,
through
yeah.
that all the way around? So
Yeah, quite a few adults.
gate would actually be better.
Yeah. I cut through the hole today. It's worth looking at. I'm not sure if that fence is ours or not, but it'd be worth checking. You probably can't see too well, but that's the solar panels for the lights. It actually opened in 2015, and I can't remember us ever, as a council, really spending any money up there. So it's in remarkably good condition, really.
If I may, Terry, I think the issue with the damage to the field is that the skate park users have been trying to extend the area of their play by kind of jumping out of the bowl.
Yes.
Going down the slope and into the farmer's field. So that's the kind of attraction of it. And they've ripped up some of the rubber kind of flooring around the outside as well.
And very similar with the entrance from the car park. They've essentially made a route from the car park down into the skate park.
What we need really is a bigger skate park.
Well, it is remarkably small. So that's one thing. The other thing, just a little bit of TLC, the litter bin up there is in a complete mess. And I was surprised, I don't know if you might want to comment on this, I was surprised there was only one bench in the whole place. We've got two benches down the bottom of Barnham Cross Common facing Berry Road, which are never used. And I was thinking about moving them from there to the skate park. Have you ever seen anyone sat on those benches?
Yes, there last weekend and the weekend before. When we cut the cloth, when they can get in, it's quite heavy.
I don't know why anyone want to sit and watch cars.
You can argue with that one as well.
Okay. We might have some benches laying around, in which case.
I disagree, but I think one bench.
One bench.
One bench. Yeah.
Oh, I'm all for compromise.
Yeah.
If we not take land away from the skate park, if we think people are already going too small then.
Say that again.
That not take land away from the skate park, which you've already suggested might be too small and is causing people to go in further afield.
There is an area where people could put some benches. That wouldn't cause too much issue. And then lastly, the notice board. I would suggest we spend a bit of money and, I always think with children and young people, if you show that you care, it encourages them to care, frankly, and it just needs a bit of TLC up there. So I'm quite happy for us to spend a bit of money tidying it up and then have a chat with Nick about this fence. At the very least, we should be planting some hedging to repair the hedge line. I'm quite happy with that. Rather than a, £5,000 fence being put around it, which won't necessarily solve the issues. And the last point I'll make about this come up at with an allotments discussion, but the we really have got to address as a council out of hours access. So on this sign, it says, if you've got any issues, please telephone the office number, which is only managed during the day. And I'd imagine at a skate park, a lot of the issues will be evenings and weekends. Mm-hmm. So, who do people contact if they've got an allotment problem on the weekend? What's the procedure? We don't have a procedure as a council about out of hours. So I was amused when I saw the phone number there. It's a point you've been making, Terry, isn't it?
It is. As chair of venues markets and commons. This is something we need to look into. There is no one's call. As far as I'm aware, all we've got is the generic email address. There will be different ways of doing this that we could use. You might have people on call, on duty, whatever, I don't really know. But we do need contact details, and I'll be very keen for them to be on the website.
Yeah. And a similar issue with the signage we was talking about at the cemetery. You know, who you're going to ring on a Saturday or a Sunday when you're in the cemetery if it's office hours only. So we just need to give that a bit more thought. We have spoke about that before and it reminded me. Anyway, so the request was for an additional fence, and we've kind of written a list about everything other than a fence. Anything else we want to add to that list?
I don't want to add anything to the list at all. I would just make a point, and it's very right. The reason that the damage is there is because they're not skating on it, they're using bikes on it.
Yeah.
So it's a bike park, and it is too small for that, which is why they're extended out. So I think, you know, a little bit like, you know, desire lines where people walk across, we've got to understand that's going to happen, and that's their preferred method. So we might need to sort of build around that rather than try and eradicate it.
Yeah.
Work with them.
I'm just looking to see if it says anything about bikes.
And that might even mean just helping them with the dirt rather than putting concrete areas in, you know.
Yeah.
Which would be cheaper.
So I think at this stage, if we undertake those sort of improvements and then we can review it next month, people generally happy with that? Good. Okay. Nick will be glad he asked now. The second request was to consider a request from the selected graziers to construct holding pens at Barnham Cross Common, Ford Meadow and Castle Park. And the decision required is to determine whether the council will have the financial resources to fund the cost of these holding pens and how to fund them. How do we want to manage this one?
I think we've done, essentially what happens is why there's a need for the holding pens is that if they have to treat the sheep, for example, or give them veterinary treatment or antibiotic, whatever they do, and it's a lot easier to do it with holding pens. So they've asked us to construct these holding pens. Initially, we had set aside an amount of £3,000 to help them and any cost that they incur. And the cost of these holding pens is a lot higher. So it's really a matter of, do we look at you know, phasing it in over a period of time so we can actually ensure that it's affordable from our side. I think the grazier on Barnham Common says it's not critical, so they can still continue doing what they're doing. They can manage without it. But in the other places, you know, it would be desirable. But I think it's just a matter of, you know, it's a significant sum of money for the committee. We are learning so much by moving to a grazing environment from a grass cutting environment, particularly not on Barnham Cross Common so much, but on the other two sites. And I think it's just something that you know, if the committee's happy, we can go away and come back with some options and say, well, if we had to phase it in, this is what the cost would be, or you know, if we speak to the graziers and find out what's essential, but it is something that they requested right at the beginning of when we started negotiating with them after they were selected.
Okay. I'm surprised about the Barnham Common one because that was the one I was most happy about installing the pens, because that's the location where we've got grazing established for the longest and it's working very well. But if it's not really a requirement, why would we spend money to do that? So that surprised me.
Must admit, let's come as a shock. When we talked to the grazier, we took back the tree. The grazier who's going to put the sheep on Barnham Common said he would like the holding pens there.
Right.
I'm slightly surprised to see he wants a holding pen on Castle Park for 2 cattle.
Which aren't there.
We're going to have just 2 cows on Castle Park. I mean, they're only small things. You know, so like that. And Ford Meadow, we're not going to have the water buffer anymore, are we?
I don't know.
Because that places it away. So I don't know, but the Barnham Common one I would agree with because of the size and the space.
And the number of animals.
Castle Park has stunned me somewhat because I didn't think the lad from Lebanon wanted a holding pen with 2 red pole cows.
Okay. Thank you. Terry?
Might be reinventing the wheel. why are we having cows on Castle Mound? Why don't we have something that can go up the hills like goats or something that will graze and keep it down?
Goats would leap over the fence. The fence is not big enough. You'd have goats running a box down Castle Lane.
So what are the fences designed for?
Sheep and cattle. But the grazier is not, the grazier we had has left, and the new grazier doesn't want, he's not keen to put sheep on Barnham Common, on Castle Park, because of various reasons. And they're happy for cattle to go on Castle Park, and cattle will graze Castle Hill. Especially these cattle they're having will graze the brambles, etc. on Castle Hill.
I'm not, okay.
But I mean,
In terms of,
Yeah.
so Barnham Common is different from Castle Hill in that Barnham Common is a sort of more open area. Castle Hill is a sort of more public area. Can we agree on that?
Yeah.
So why are we putting cows in a public area? That seems mad, because we're going to get complaints.
No, these cows are docile. They're never going to be like in calf time. They'll never be there when they're in calving time, etc., etc. These are very similar to the small cattle they had on Barnham Common. These are red poll of belted Galloway. We don't have a grazier to put the sheep on Castle Hill. So we had to go with what the grazier offered, which was these two cows to put on Castle Hill, which will do the same job as the sheep, will clear the scrub. The scrub on Castle Mound is different to the scrub on Barnham Common.
Yeah.
So
Plus you're on a steep incline.
So yeah, the cows, you said we'll get up there. We did have the standard joke about, we did have a standard joke about how their front legs are short.
Mountain cows.
Mountain cows, yeah. Fair
You
long.
can go up the steps.
Idle mice and hide it.
So wouldn't it be better to put proper fencing in and have goats?
That's another, we would never ever decide about the goats. That was mentioned once, but just, I think the price was horrendous, so it was discounted.
Small goats.
I'm just concerned about the public.
Me too.
So can we use the term interaction with cows?
Cows are harmless if you don't. They're not calving.
Right, okay. I'm talking about perceptions here.
Okay, I've got Mike, then Hazel, please.
Thank you. I think there's a bit of information I would like before I certainly further can make a decision, and there are a number of issues. One is whether we find it attractive, whether we find it easy to attract graziers or difficult. If it's easy, if there's competition, then we might consider whether other graziers would have less facilities. That's one thing. Secondly, what has changed to make it more appropriate or necessary to have part holding pens than in the past? Thirdly, what sort of cost are we looking at? And fourthly, is there a length of time during which any of the three areas gets grazed up? What I'm looking at really is whether, in fact, the two smaller ones are so limited that we could consider whether an option is just to give up grazing on the concentrate on Barnham Common, which is significantly larger, and on both sides.
Okay, thank you. Hazel?
Well, I feel like while we're talking about this, the next point is very relevant.
Yes.
We're talking about the electric fencing that is required for cattle. So saying that they're in this public area and they're docile, but yet we need this electric fencing to keep them in, and that's a cost to consider, along with the pens. And if we're putting pens in, they're going to be pens that are for cattle specifically. This.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think some of you have heard my rantings that I would like us to adopt a 5 to 10 year management plan for Castle Park. I think we're really lucky to have Castle Park, and we need to manage it properly. And I think as part of that, we need to be clear on, is grazing part of the long-term plan? And if so, what sort of grazing? And from then we can make some decisions about, do we put in pens, do we put in electric fences? I'm very uncomfortable that we've spent a lot of money as a council putting in fences that are not sufficient for what we need. We're going to have cows, and we're still going to have a lot of grass that doesn't get touched by them, particularly at the hill. And actually, that's not the biggest issues in that location. The sheer quantity of trees and whatnot that need to be managed there is a much, bigger issue. So I'm nervous about making a decision because I would rather see a whole plan for that area. Alan tells me that Norfolk Wildlife Trust have drafted or are drafting a management plan. They're finished drafting. And I think what we need to do as a committee is look at that and break it down into stages and start allocating some money to implement that plan. Because I'm a bit like Terry, if the need is for goats, because that would do a better job, I would much rather consider spending some money addressing the fencing issue rather than putting in holding pens and electric fences, which we might not need to. So what are we doing? The aim is to manage it in a way that supports conservation. And if the best way to achieve that is by having goats, then what do we need to do to make that happen is really where
I think with Castle Park in particular, we are kind of civilising it to the point where it's hardly an open space anymore. I mean, you could put a nice tea shop on, perhaps. We've already got a significant amount of fencing, which, as you say, the success of which is very questionable. We've got a way of getting to the top which didn't exist before, which is probably a good thing in itself. It does detract from the wildness of the park. Now we're talking about electric fencing and pens. It's over, it seems to me, making it so controlled and limited that it loses half the point, that you're not thinking about garden anymore. You're in a wild space. I just wonder whether we've, really, in a way, I'm supporting what you're saying. We urgently need a long-term plan formed with help from outside experts, but which helps us make the best of it for our citizens. I'm not sure if we want vast amounts more fence personally, and I think the cost is considerable. Again, we've seen some costs on the list, the previous item, £12,000. It's not cheap.
Okay, I've got Chris and then Doug.
What we've had to come up with is not an ideal answer. We only had 3 graziers turn up to quote for that work. One wasn't suitable. The other one would have put sheep on Barnum Common, but he wasn't prepared to put sheep on Castle Park due to the public and dogs, etc. And the third one didn't have sheep, he had rare cattle, and he was the only one we could get to put grazing on Castle Park. So obviously, I agree, I think we put the fencing in way too soon, possibly.
Absolutely.
It was just unfortunate that the last grazier we had has backed away because of the amount of sheep he'd lost on Barnum Common through selfish people letting their dogs attack sheep. This is why he's gone. Now, he was really good because he brought the water buffalo in, which attracted people from all over the place. And that, it was really great to see. We had 3 applicants, and that's all that. One was prepared to do the sheep on the common, not on Castle Park, and the other lad was prepared to have some cattle on Castle Park. As someone who's brought up on a farm, I'm not the biggest fan of electric fencing. Was being stupid and a kid, he used to grab it to see what would happen, and you can imagine that happening, can't you, on the park? We'd have to have warning signs of your own risk, etc. People still take their dogs into them fence. But I mean, the ideal world would have been the goats, but we couldn't find at the time any graziers who were going to come. Just we were stuck with the 3. But the holding pens on Barnum Common, definitely. On the Castle Park and Watermeadow are not convinced.
Doug, please.
I'm going to say basically the same point about the electric fence, just making me go, because I know that, I did in a rural area, and that's exactly what you did as a kid. And none of people doing it now, so I'm really very nervous about that. Just slating back, the original starting point of this was that, they're saying it's not actually that urgently needed, particularly. So are we not, therefore, basically the conclusion that it's just that long-term planning for
Depends on Barnum Common and not
the electric fence. The grazier refuses to bring them on. He says within a day the cattle would have actually knocked down the fence. So the low voltage fence is actually to keep the cattle away from the fence. as it stands now, they'll actually escape within 24 hours. That's the reason for the electric fence. I also thought it was crazy when I first heard it, but that's really why it's there. It's to keep the cattle in. Byproduct is how many kids get injured or
I was when I was younger.
yeah.
So we're not even, I find it quite odd because the water troughs are on Castle Park at the moment. So we're not getting cows until we put an electric fence in, essentially is what they've said.
Essentially.
What do we stand to lose then? Is it, how much does the grazier pay us, or do we not get paid, we just get the grazing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We get some long grass.
I mean, if I can say, the alternative cost is that we get a grant from the Rural Payments Authority to look after stewardship grants. So if we don't look after the kind of field growth, we will actually have to cut it ourselves manually. So when we talk about the cost, there's a significant saving from having the ground grazed rather than having mechanical cuts. And if you just look recently, we had mechanical cuts done. They were very controversial and they cost us a fortune. There was substantial amounts of money. I think just to cut cost amount, time we got all the authorities, we were talking double, tens of thousands of pounds just to have that done. So we always have to bear in mind that cost versus a capital outlay cost now.
Okay, thank you. I've got Carla next and then Terry Land.
Yeah, I was going to go back to a difficult point when you mentioned the dog attacks to the sheep and whatnot. If I remember well, we've been through this conversation some time ago because there was a period there were so many dog attacks that grazers were really concerned. We actually went as far as try to alert the police to this type of incidents and everything. So this was well talked about for those that were here before. This was well discussed at the time because there were so many problems with it. And the thing with the grazers is there was 3, and then there was 2, and then there was 1. It's not the same thing as asking for a tender for a construction project. But there isn't that many grazers around. They have that capacity, those animals to put in those places. A significant amount of money, basically, of savings in grazing rather than cutting mechanically. It is really substantial. I think that's the main reason why the council went their way. And also the environmental impact as well. I know that Terry mentioned that not everybody sees it the same way, and yes, it is controversial. There was a lot of people once who was either in favor or against animals rather than just cutting them out down. But on the scale between the environmental impact and the savings, grazing was definitely better. We were trying to keep the grazier happier because there's too many attacks, and obviously if they now are asking us to invest in fencing, why not? We really, from my point of view, as my opinion, we really don't have major arguments for it because there isn't many options there. If the grazer falls out, and we also find ourselves with no provision. We just have to be careful how we do it, I guess.
Thank you. Terry?
As I've got older, I've found there's a certain maturity perhaps in when you're doing something, knowing when to just pack it in and start again, because you're just going to make things worse. And that seems to be the point we're at with all of this right now, doesn't it? I wonder if, and I think this sort of reflects what you were saying about having a proper look at it. We need to start again and see what's best, because it's a mess, isn't it?
It feels reactionary, which makes us uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Hazel, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's probably worth noting that I'm sure we're all aware, but the fences have been quite controversial in the town. The money spent and people thinking these fences have been up a blooming long time, nothing's happening. They've spent all of this money.
Yep.
So whatever step we take next, people are going to be. I mean, obviously it's in the centre of town as well. It's a very looked at area, so people are going to be really scrutinising what we do decide to do.
Okay. Chris?
Yeah, I must admit, I'm beginning to come more and more around to this feeling that we've invested all this money in this fencing. How long ago we seem to run into a black hole where we can't seem to do anything with it. Do we bite the bullet, take the fencing away and put it somewhere else, and then spend that money we were there helping the grazier on the common with his holding pens, etc., and just say to the people we made a mistake?
No. We say they made a mistake.
Yeah. Well, sorry, well, we put it, but I mean, I'm beginning to come along now.
So to summarise, I don't mind having a debate about some of these issues at all, because I think it's really useful to sort of tease out the different points. I think what we're essentially saying, Alan, is we need some more information about this, and I personally would like for the different options to be probed a bit more by the team. You know, are goats possible? Is it possible to raise the fence? How much would that cost? How does that fit in with the management plan? I mean, to pick up your point, yes, money is a driving factor, but we do all of this to manage those locations to aid conservation. That's really why we do this. And are cows preferable to goats? I don't know, but we need to be working out why we're doing it, essentially.
Could we get just put the vote out again, see if we get any more graziers interested? Because what, 18 months ago, since we spoke to the last lot here, 18 months?
That was a lot more recent. It was
Last year.
It was last year. It was September, October last year.
Find any more?
Quickly mention that I'm all for it, best option for conservation, but because it's such a controversial issue with the public itself, I think it needs to be made very clear to the public. Increase the fence or whatever measure we take, why isn't done when it's grounded and the interest of concern in keeping the land, because otherwise we're just going to have criticism and a lot of people.
The point you would have heard me make in the chair on a number of occasions is we need to be able to explain why we do stuff. And I don't think we always can. And if we can't, we shouldn't be doing it. Okay. We'll, what was that one there for both the second one and the third one? The other thing I'd throw into the mix there, Alan, is Tina's comment about looking at potential funding sources for some of this, because, you know, we have seen reductions in our money from the Rural Payments Agency. You know, do they have some specific capital funds that would help fund the pens or new fencing and that sort of stuff? So.
We actually did send an email today to the Rural Payments Agency to ask them. So Nick has done that.
Because I like things a lot more if I'm not paying.
No, he's did that today.
Okay, good. So that's a good discussion, and we'll park it there and move on. So no cows for the time being, folks.
That's a real no.
You heard it here first. But no, anyway, I'm moving on.
Somebody's having a minute.
I'm not sure you're going to minute all of that, Karen, but discussion took place.
You did say you're going to move on.
Oh, I did, didn't I? Yeah. Right, 6323, request to finance the placement of a commemorative benches and a plaque at the FEPAL site. Hopefully you all know where the FEPAL tree is, Far East Prisoner of War. So a member of the public has offered to fund 2 benches and a information plaque next to the FEPAL tree, which is a very generous offer. And I've asked this person to give me a bit of background, which I will read to you. So it says, my father was captured with many others from the Thetford area at the fall of Singapore on February the 15th, 1942, on his 27th birthday, and started 3.5 years in forced work and starvation in captivity, including some of the time on the infamous Railway of Death, where not many survived. On their release in August 1945, many of the survivors weighed only 6 stone and faced a life of illness and other problems. With my sister and myself, we had never known our father, and the family had to get used to a different man. The war in the Far East is often referred to as the Forgotten War, as the returning men were never regarded as heroes except by those who knew them. This area, with 2 seats and an information board, will be a fitting reminder to those who want to sit and think for a while in nice surroundings. Thank you for agreeing to consider this item. So it's a very generous offer. They're asking the Town Council to do the work, but they are happy to pay for it. Mike.
There's a little ceremony each year by those who feel strongly about this issue, and I try and go each year, partly because it's yards from my home, but it's a lovely location, Nuns Bridges, and I think it's. I don't want to get into the emotion of it. I think we do well to remember this particular aspect of war and warfare, and the particular issue of the poor treatment of prisoners of war for whom there is a convention and it was broken time after time in that war. I don't want to sound as I'm anti-Japanese, which can happen and is dangerous and bad, because in the end the Japanese suffered grievously, and no Japanese alive now have got anything to do with what happened. So it's not, I hope it's not an issue of that issue, but it is important to remember that people did suffer unfairly, unreasonably, improperly, because they did their duty. And I think it's a nice location and a good place, and I think it's a super offer, and I hope we'll feel delighted to accept it and to encourage them to feel that they're welcome to stop there once a year or any time they want. And the seats make it easier for people to do that. And it's a nice place to have more seats. It's on the river. Can't hardly think of a better place for more seats. So let's go ahead with it, please.
I absolutely agree. I think it's a great idea. And taking the emotion right out of it, my questions are purely practical. The area floods. You know, we've got to put proper bases in for the benches. They've got to be benches that are, you know, suitable, not something that somebody else buys. So then we're going to have the maintenance of those benches. So there's a significant outlay, even though there's a very kind offer to buy it in the first place. I assume that the money going with that is also going to go towards the information plaque. Is that right? So, I mean, great idea, but we must think very carefully about how we site, how we build, because very quickly they'll be underwater or you know, in a position where they can't be used, which would be a shame.
Yeah. Chris?
Yeah, I agree entirely. I think, as it's been called, the forgotten thing. I mean, a friend of my parents, I mean, we've done an awful lot of work in the cemetery, remembering the soldiers from the first war, etc. We should do the same for this one. I agree with that. It has to be made proper, solid, and flood-proof, and it will enhance the area, I think.
Yep. So if we, as a community, accept the offer and then get some details about the standard of bench, they do come in standards, and what we're really saying is we want a decent one for that location. And then I'm not quite sure who would design the text to go on the plaque or the information board, so we need to give that some thought. There certainly was a Fee Power Association in Thetford, wasn't there? So it would be worth having a chat with them. But agree to the request and look forward to some more details, basically. Hazel.
Potentially a good opportunity to raise awareness of the area and the issue, not the issue, but fee power and everything. So press release or events or something.
Yeah. Is it normally September they do the? No, I can't remember when it is. I've been several times, but
I can't remember.
I think
I think
it's September.
Whenever it is, hopefully it's in a few months' time, and we might be able to tie in the unveiling of these benches and the annual event. Good. Okay. 6423. Use of volunteer teams to support amenities-related priorities. So, as most of you will know, we have a very successful conservation group that works for the town council, and in Nick's report they record how many hours they volunteer to support local conservation projects, which is always very impressive. I think it was 60-something hours this month. So what the is that we broaden out that team to really sort of harness some of the passion amongst people in Thetford, community spirit, so that people can become a town council volunteer covered by our insurance, but undertake other tasks. So not just conservation related, but why are we spending staff time planting up flower beds and planters when I know there are individuals in the town that would more than happily do that for us as a town? They want to take pride in what we do. And similarly with litter picks, or might be graffiti removal. So it's really to get the committee's consent for us to broaden out the offer. And I think the standard risk assessment and sort of sign-up form was included in your pack, so you can see that. So we'd basically amend that to make it more of a generic role than just conservation. And to make sure we've got town council support for that. Relatively simple. Carla and then Mac.
I was just going to quickly add, I think this is a brilliant idea, maximizing the community spirit for it to work for the town, to where, you know, which people sort of do everything. And another aspect that I want to mention is social prescribing, which is the big thing now about people getting outdoors, doing activities because good for their mental health, because they need to socialize, especially the older generation. So I think, you know, this if we set up like a volunteers group and it's well structured, like you said, part of the council where they can register as a volunteer to be available on demand for different events or different things, whether they need planting or helping or whatever, I think it'll work really well because once they've sort of kind of signed off as a volunteer and they register, they can be on call to help out every time there's an event or there's an initiative going on in town. The same thing can be said, the council can then link up with other organizations and maybe get referrals for social prescribing, you know, whether it's the clinics or health centers, whatever it is. But if they know of somebody that needs to be included or you know, take part of an initiative, they can perhaps refer them to the volunteers, to the council scheme to do so. Which is an idea.
Really good point. Extra volunteers for events, I think, is a really good idea. Actually, I hadn't thought of that one, so that's good. Mac, were you next?
All my sandwiches there. So I was going to say, stately homes, museums already do this. It costs very little, maybe, you know, tabards and that kind of thing. A little bit of training is required, but it works really well. They already do this kind of thing in Brandon for planting, and you can, you know, they've won awards on that. They've done really well with it. So I think it's a great scheme. We've also got lots of other volunteer groups in the town anyway, the sex rock and roll weeding, you know, teams and the likes. And who's to say that actually, as this grows, they can't be, you know, brought into the fold and, you know, given that same sort of aftercare and overarching look from the town council. Because, you know, why shouldn't we be involved with the volunteers? Great. By the way, it's the 15th of August, VJ Day. Should have known, I was looking at it earlier, and it's the 8th of May for VJ Day.
That's right, that's the date.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you. I knew it was September-ish.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, move quickly, aren't we?
Yeah, we were.
Yes, I'm really supportive of this idea. I just wonder who does the recruitment and induction and management of the volunteers.
Yes, that was my question to the staff when we set the agenda. I think we have some slight challenges about capacity in the staff team, which we need to be mindful of, particularly at finance and personnel. It takes time to coordinate volunteers and to coordinate training and look after them. But if we are agreeing that this is the route we want to go down, we need to make sure that we've got the capacity. So it's a very valid point. Mike.
Thanks. Yes, I think what Max said is good sense, and there are groups out there, as he pointed out, that already volunteer, and there's no point in reinventing the wheel. I think there are some we could possibly cooperate with. I'll give you two examples. One is the Ancient House, which does have a group of, in their case, younger people who do things, and we could certainly work with them to find people who are interested in more the heritage side of volunteering. And another I'll just mention is an organisation called this, I can't remember what it's called, but it's Thetford Heritage
Industry Scheme.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Which tries to bring back into employment people who have had some issue in life, which may have made it difficult for them to have employment. And the present thing they do is gardening, which people like me pay for, but which is free to people who deserve it to be free. And it's a very limited scheme in terms of number, but I think we would be able to work with the two leaders of it to link up the two things. So I would see possibly people starting with, say, gardening, and then be encouraged to move to some other aspect of conservation if they want to have more volunteering before looking for a permanent paid job. So I think we could work really hard to involve the teams around the town. And maybe that would also encourage them to feel they've been noticed by the town council and trusted and supported by the town council. So it could be a two-way issue.
I think what we need to decide then is where we're looking to create a network of the existing groups, because, you know, there's ones you mentioned, there's the river groups and everything. There's a multitude of small groups doing conservation or upkeeping work as volunteers in town. So do we create a net and sort of oversee and give them like the umbrella protection? Or do we create, or is the idea to create the council's own volunteer group, you know, managed and trained by the council themselves as an independent one? I think I'm not quite clear which way we're going about this. I think this needs to be decided.
Yeah, I think it's very much to establish our own team, because they would be covered by our insurance and our risk assessments, but to work more in partnership with others.
Okay.
Just one question on this. We have a lone lady in the town who goes about planting stuff
We do.
off her own back. I was really pleased with what she does, but I was highly concerned the fact she was on her hands and knees on the bend on the Berry Road by the church.
Yeah.
All she needed to do was topple backwards and go. But I don't want to stop her from doing what she does. I'm working with her now on doing some planting underneath the town signs where you come in and out on high place. But I would really like to find a way of encouraging her to join in, or at least have some kind of cover from the council for what she does.
She would be a very good example of the sort of person that I would like to get to this. Because, you know, no disrespect to our staff, but she is an expert in planting. You know, why wouldn't we want to harness her skills and her knowledge? She'd do a better job than me at planting things up. So, you know.
I might invite her to the barrow and planting for her plants as well. So.
Good. All right. Well, hopefully that is the start of something very positive, and then we can have a chat about capacity, because we are a small team, so we need to be mindful of that. Moving on to 6523, SAM2 speed equipment, to consider the continued use of SAM2 speed equipment and the placement of that equipment. So a number of years ago, Thetford Council applied for funding from Norfolk County Council to buy some SAM2 signs. SAM stands for some speed awareness monitoring. Essentially, they're the flashing signs when you go into a village. They've been sat in a cupboard for about 3 years, maybe longer. And we need to put them to use, basically, is where we're at. So Jane James, County Councillor, Thetford East, has offered out of her local member highways budget. Each county councillor has up to 10 grand to spend each financial year on local highways projects. Jane has offered to fund the pole and the brackets necessary to put this piece of equipment up on Cloverfields, where there is a particular request to do that. What we need to agree as a local town council is, are we happy for our staff to put to physically go along and put the SAM2 up onto that bracket and then take it down again, because it can only go up for 2 weeks. We did 4 weeks. 4 weeks, even better. So it can only legally go up for a certain amount of time, 4 weeks, and then it needs to come down again. So we need to approve that, and I'm sure that's something that we can accommodate. And then, are we wanting to minute that we are happy to spend the money and then claim it back from county? Yeah, so we would spend it, but it wouldn't actually cost us anything as it's being covered by county. Is that the nuts and bolts of it?
And I think also just to go back even one step.
Yep.
Do we want to continue using the SAM2 speed or equipment, or do we want to actually dispose of it?
Okay.
And I think that's
yes. So a general consensus from the committee on whether we want to continue using the equipment would be useful too. Any questions? Hazel?
So that's the cost for specifically for Cloverfields and the brackets.
Yeah.
But if we keep the machine, presumably we want to move it all around the towns.
Yes.
Part of the consideration would be the cost of poles and brackets for the rest of town.
Yes.
My understanding is sites are scattered around the town. There's some in Castle Park, Castle Lane, Hurstway, Rosecross Way, and Woodlands Drive. So those are the 4 sites that Norfolk County Council have identified together with the County Councillor James.
Yeah.
And it's so those 4 sites can be used, and we have to have more than 3 sites because you can't put the stands back. It can stay there for 4 weeks, but you can't bring it. You can't use it at the same site until an 8-week period has actually kind of passed. So you've got to have 3 sites at minimum. County Council have identified 4, and the quotes that we are getting are for those 4 sites.
Mac?
I've got a bit of background on this because
Yeah, that'd be useful
so
actually.
I used to do the community speed box in the town, and this was part of the driver for getting it. The signs, if you haven't seen it, it really is, you know, just those ones which flash up red, green, whether you're doing well. That's all it is. We have a site already, and you know, I managed to secure one which is on a lamppost on the Mumford Road, just on the before you get to the Croxton crossing. And that was the only lamppost we've managed to secure across the whole town. It's on every street. There was a reason why they couldn't do it. They couldn't bear the weight. They were too old. It was windy. Whatever it was, they couldn't use them. It wasn't straight enough. You couldn't get it high enough. It was it had to be more than 2.4 meters away from the ground if it was on a path. All this kind of stuff. So that's why we've ended up with it in a cupboard for so long, because all the other councils have kind of hindered us in one way or another. The thing about putting the posts in is once you've got those posts in, it really is quite easy. Now, there's 2 parts to this. First is you can put them and they're there for a warning for 4 weeks, up to 4 weeks if you want to leave them there that long, or you can move before. And you can move them around however many sites you like. You've obviously got to buy poles and brackets. There should be another 2 brackets still sat with it. So, you know, there is a cost for that. The staff can put them up. Now, the important thing about these is you can also capture a lot of data off them. But once you start doing that, you've got to get somebody to get the data. It's got to be plugged into a laptop. And then, you know, if you can get volunteers to do it, it's quite onerous. So, you know, we could just put them up and have them as a visible deterrent until we manage to gather some teams that could do that extra work. I'd probably suggest that Cloverfields would jump at it with, you know, who's there. So really worth doing, I think. I would put one piece of caution in that before we do anything, we've got to get the thing out of the cupboard, dust it off, make sure the batteries work. All that. It's sat there a while now. But otherwise, yeah, it's a shame it hasn't been used. And given that we've had another death in the town on a main road, and given that we had the very bad implementation of 30 for Thetford, this is only going to be, you know, seen as us doing something positive about it.
The example you held up had 30 on it, but presumably these are geared for 20 as well.
Well, it's difficult. You can adjust the speed.
Okay.
So you can change it from 60, 40, 30, 20.
Nervous about it, put it on Cloverfields and then, which is
Yeah, you speed everybody up.
and then it never flashing.
You can go 20. There's always an argument about 20, and it's a recommendation and not a speed limit.
Yeah. Okay, that's really useful. Thank you, Matt. Doug, did you have your hand up?
We're just checking on sort of costs of things, and just saying that, so the cost is for the one time to get the things up, and then it can be just used consistently with minimum cost. Is that right?
Yeah, so the cost to us is staff time.
Yeah.
So we will be reimbursed in full by Norfolk County Council via Jane's members' budget. And our contribution is one, bankrolling that, and staff time putting it up and taking it down.
Yeah, to get recalibrated.
Recalibrated.
So say, and then recalibrate the outset.
Yeah.
How many of these have you got?
One.
Because back in the original time when we bought this, we were asked to give areas for it to go. And one of the prime areas we discussed at the time was Fir Road. yet again, that's been knocked on the head there by all going over Cloverfield, etc. But Fir Road is a racetrack. It needs sorting out. And Kim's Belt, which is like, we agreed that that's where we would put one of these.
Yeah.
Up, you know, so it really needs to go that way. And I agree with that completely. Due to the fact these signs have not been a bit of a disaster on the Norwich, but on the old A11 and what's happened there. I mean, we could even put one along there now.
I'm quite keen that we do Cloverfield as a bit of a pilot and get it to work well. There's a very proactive residents group there that are campaigning for this to happen. So let's make a start, and then we can add additional locations as time goes on.
I'll just make an observation. We've already got that place on Mumford Road. Get it working, we can put it up, and then 4 weeks later, by which time we'll have bought the pole for Cloverfield's, got it already, then we can go straight on that one.
Brilliant.
So we can get it going pretty quick.
I've missed track of hands. Doug, did you have a further?
Yeah, I was just going to say about I don't know the details per road, but if it's a racetrack, if it's a case of basically people speeding because they want to have fun, those signs do nothing. That's to catch the people who are just accidentally speeding. So I think we need to be conscious of that when we're putting signs for those, because they're really useful for people who, just subconsciously don't know the speed limit.
I wasn't laughing at you. I'm laughing at the fact that I've been pushing for this for years and I got a speeding ticket the other day.
You didn't have these signs.
It wasn't in Thetford.
Okay, let you off.
Makes it better.
Cool. Thank you, Doug. Mike?
Really a question for Mac, if I may, and I'm not getting at you. We might have the information. Did there not used to be one of these flashing signs on bridges?
So there still are. I did do a quick PowerPoint presentation. I didn't realise that these areas have been selected already, and I'd done a lot of work on this prior when we were doing Community Speed Watch. Because obviously, one of the main things you need to look at is the main roads that we've got coming in. So London Road, Norwich Road, Mumford Road. Other roads, perhaps not so much, because things like Hearth Way, which is a fast road, does have traffic lights on it, which does stop a lot of the traffic going too fast down there, and it's shorter than a Norwich Road. There's a sign on Castle Streets. There's a sign on Nuns Bridge Road. We've got a proper speed camera on the Bury Road. So you start to take these out, and you're reducing the areas you probably need to put it, because it'd be a bit wasted. But yeah, I think definitely Cloverfield. On that one main road that goes through, it really needs to be done. And one of the other things about this is when you get into the estate and you see, I think I had 24 different locations on Speedwatch where we used to put them, and pretty much I could discount 15 of them straight away, because although it looked like traffic is going fast, it's not ever doing over 30. It's just that because of the design of the roads, it looks a lot faster. We had several on Admirals, and we were always, people are going mad around there, and you get there and they're doing 32. It's not that. So, what people tell you they're doing and what is actually happening is a world of difference. Is what I'm trying to say.
I've stood there and watched.
You've done it with me,
Yeah, I know. I've checked the traffic on Fir and Kim's Belt.
I'm with Chris. We could do with one per road. It's really bad.
Well, we'll let Cloverfields be the pilot, and once we know how not to do it, we'll put it on Fir Road. How about that?
Yeah.
That's good.
Okay, so looking at the decisions, one is to whether to continue to make speed equipment, that's optimistic, make speed equipment available. I'm sensing that we're happy for Town Council to facilitate this. We're happy to fund this and claim back as necessary through Jane's allowance. And we're happy for Town Council staff to put up, take down and support monitoring and data collection, essentially. Anything else you need from us, Alan, to expedite this? So in theory, once it's been calibrated, how long till we get the sign going up?
Once it's been calibrated, it can go up the next day.
I think what we'll do is I think Cora is if we go to Mumford Road first, pending the erection of the pole, and then we could, I think we need to find the volunteers for Mumford Road, because at the moment we've just got a volunteer group at Cora, and it's finding a volunteer group for.
So I don't think that's an issue at the moment. I think we should just look at putting it up, taking it down, putting it up, taking it down, and moving locations. If we get volunteer groups later, great, but if we wait for them, it'll hinder the progress.
The data monitoring is almost a bonus, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree.
I agree. Get out. Cool.
It's delighted.
Hold you to putting it up further.
That means I've got to spend my highways budget.
That's right.
Somebody has to.
6623 toilet facilities at open space events on Melford Common. This links to the recent visit by the fair, which was very successful. But nearby premises have highlighted that they have a huge demand for toilets, because obviously the toilets at Castle Park close at 5 o'clock. So when the fair's down evening and not evenings, it's open at the weekend, that puts a burden on places like the Albion. This was raised by Stuart Wright as mayor. People contacted him. And one of the suggestions we had was when people apply to use Castle Park, because Castle Park, Melford Common is town council land, when they apply to do that, we give consent on the condition that they're either providing their own toilets or they make a financial contribution to allow the toilets at Castle Park to be opened to accommodate, whether that's our own staff doing that or whether that's an external contractor. We would agree an amount. It wouldn't be overly expensive. But if it was a 1-day event or a 3-day event or longer, as the fair sometimes is, they would basically be conditional on them using that space that they contribute to toilets. Is that something the committee would be happy to support?
Yes.
Yep. So we will work out a cost and we will add that to the open space policy.
So with Portaloos being on here, is that an or? Sorry, I'm just trying to read it. I'm just thinking Portaloos are a waste of resources. If we don't need them, we can just pay for the toilets to be opened up.
Yeah, I think some hirers of Melford Common in particular do pay for Portaloos.
Yeah.
So it would be pointless forcing them to also then pay to have Castle Park toilets. But we're essentially saying you have to provide toilets either yourself or pay us to provide them for you.
Okay, so it's giving them the option to decide.
Yeah, depends on the scale of the event as well, because they are single male and female toilets. So if it's a large event, they might have to have Portaloos, but it's an improvement on what we've got at the moment, which is nothing.
Do people using that area pay a fee to cover the cost of more people using the toilets?
There's an open space policy that sets a list of charges for use of town council land. It's a higher rate if it's commercial, and there's a charitable rate. And I can't remember what the rate is for Melford Common. It's about 250 quid, isn't it?
It's about 275.
Yeah, so there is a fee structure already just for the use of the land. And what we're saying is it's additional for the toilets.
So basically adding another tick box you want.
Yeah. Mac?
I was just going to say, when we have big events down on Melford Common, particularly at the bottom down near Zach's, nobody's going to go from there up to the top to use those toilets.
No.
So we must ensure that they have toilets provided.
Yeah.
It's not don't bother bringing yours, you can use ours, because they won't.
Yeah. When there's a request to use our land, this committee says yay or nay to that. And there's a process they have to go through, and one of it is providing a risk assessment. So I think it's perfectly legitimate for us to say, as part of that risk assessment, where's your toilet provision?
Yep.
So not ever insisted on it before, but I think it's a legitimate request for the fair in particular. There are no toilets whatsoever. So cool. Happy with that?
Yep.
Some more work for you. Our ever increasing open space policy. Okay, small grants. To receive a report on small grants, this is the list of grants that we've given for the last financial year. And for those of you that are new, this committee has an annual budget of £6,000 to award to local voluntary and community groups. It's up to £300 per application. The application form's on our website. You win a prize if you can find it, but it is on there. Or you can ask councillors or the staff to send you a copy by email, which is what normally happens. But please do encourage people to apply. It's a really worthwhile grant scheme. And in the last year, Alan's going to tell us how many groups we've supported.
I was so proud of myself in getting this document out, and I've realised now that I actually forgot to put the date of it. So it was emailed to me. So could I email it to all the members?
Yes, you can.
Otherwise, you would watch me.
You told me you produced it, and then I didn't think to tell you I hadn't actually seen it.
Well, we have to put it on our website, part of the transparency code anyway. That deadline is the end of this month, so it would go to onto the website then. But I'll email it to all the members. I do apologise.
That's quite all right. We have to take our word for it. We supported lots of very worthwhile causes, but we do a summary every year. And we normally have 2 per month to look at. We try and not have loads and loads and then a gap, but tonight we have 3. So do you want to take us through the first one? These have all been circulated by email, so hopefully you've had a chance to read them. Alan does a check. There's an approved checklist which he goes through, and he tells us if they've met that criteria or not. So,
May I general question?
yeah, sure.
Roughly, how much money do we have to give out, and how well used is it normally in a year?
So it's been £6,000 for a while, and I can't remember the last time we overspent. So
we haven't overspent in the last 4 years.
Yeah, I would say probably around £4,000 a year, roughly, we spend from memory. Yeah, you can only apply once a year.
Okay. I guess the reason I ask is that £300 seems like a particularly small amount these days, and I just don't know whether there's scope to be a bit more generous.
It was a lot of money when we set it up. You can blame inflation. We have a terms and conditions and sort of eligibility criteria. And what I wanted to do was to give you guys an overview of assessing the applications, but then next month or the month after, review those terms and conditions. And at that point, you can decide if the £300 needs to change.
Just for information, when I first joined the council, we used to have bigger, like a large and small grants. And there was the largest one,
Medium, £2,000.
£2,000, which is what we used to do. And then it was changed for this amount. Brilliant.
Doug?
Did you say that you can only apply once a year? Is that regardless of, say, like one organisation's doing 2 different things? They stick in there, so they do one application.
It's 1 per organisation.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Okay, right.
In terms of the first one, it's in fact, in respect of all 3 of them, they've all complied with the conditions of the grant. Everything that we required was there. And one of the things that we have also learned is, and when we had our pre-meeting and we talked about revising it, is that there's a charities commission, and most of these organisations are actually registered with the charities commission. So we can actually bring that into account, because you can see quite easily whether they've complied, they have all their financial information, governance information, and it's far more detailed than the information that we actually request from them. So in terms of these 3, the first one is Cora. I'm still learning how to pronounce it. It's really just, they've been doing a lot of litter picking and cleaning, and all they're looking for is to buy new equipment and to replace equipment that's actually needs replacing.
Did anyone have any questions on the Cora application? Nope. Content. Can I have a proposer to award that funding? Mac, and a seconder? Hazel? Everyone in agreement?
Yeah.
There you are. Easy as that, £300. Second one?
The Thetford Music Project, and what they're looking to do is just fund a new club that they're hoping will meet on a weekly basis. I pronounce it, Bimbi, Jimba. And what they're looking for the club is to purchase a standalone portable speaker and a microphone. Their cost is 345. They're obviously just seeking £300 from us.
Any questions? Nope. Can I have a proposer? Johan, and a seconder? Mike, all in agreement?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And the last one?
The last one is the Thetford Vineyard Church, Vineyard Church. And what they have a number of clubs and a number of initiatives. This will be the third grant that they've applied for in the last 4 years. And they're just looking to add courses to some of their family-orientated, first aid courses to some of the family-orientated meetings that they have. That's a demand from the people that have been attending, that they would actually like a basic first aid course, and this money would go towards funding that course.
Any questions? Very happy committee. No questions. You should have seen the old committee. They ripped these apart. Can I? Yeah, be here for hours for 300 quid. Can I have a proposer for Vineyard Church? Chris Harvey and a seconder. Carla, everyone in agreement?
Yes.
It's because your check process is so thorough, Alan. Yeah, you have no questions. Cool. Yeah, so please do encourage people to apply, and we'll see who we get for next month. Are there any groups indicating there? Is there any sort of waiting in the wings that the process?
None of them arrived. But I think one of the challenges we have is that we've got so many positions of the small grant application process. So people that have applied in previous years keep that documentation. So when we revise it, we might have to say, put big flashing lights, you have to use the latest one rather than earlier reiterations of it.
Do we not put an adopted date and a revision date?
We do. An adopted date, but not a revision date.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to show you something, and you made a really good point about the cost. So that was one that was bought for £300. That's a trolley, a litter cart that we use for Norwich Road, which we bid for through here. So you can see how far 300 quid goes. Not a lot. So yeah, I think you make a good point.
Hazel?
How do we actually advertise these? Because I haven't heard of them before this. We could do more advertising somehow.
I've added something to Mike's agenda, so I'm going to add something to Terry and Doug's for marketing and comms. But we need to be much better at promoting all manner of things with this council, including the small grant scheme. So we have done our best as an immunities committee. If we haven't got any other applications, it's probably wise that we do a push again. I have groups to present checks, and something ended up on Facebook as a result. And actually, they were just very grateful that somebody was taking an interest in their group. So we'll try and do a bit more of that. But really, the publicity is through councillors talking to groups that you're involved in.
If you know about people, their structure, then can apply and support them, bring it to the table. I think that's the thing.
We do usually manage to spend the £6,000. It's not as if we've got a backlog of money that we haven't been able to get rid of. So, people must find out somehow that it's available.
Okay, moving on, 6.8/23 community engagement to discuss and agree any consultation or media release required. Very timely following that last conversation. So we will certainly promote small grants. Is there anything else we've decided on tonight's agenda that people feel we should be promoting? No? Back.
The town report. Do we think it's worthwhile advertising that town report that we see so that other people can see the good work that's been done by the council officers?
One of the things we've tried to do is when the guys do some good work, so they put needs street furniture, we upload onto Facebook, before and after pictures, and promote things like that. And it doesn't happen too often. But I would certainly encourage that we do more of that because they do so much, but we don't talk about it. If we've been out planting something, people assume that the planters are done by Breckland or Norfolk or whoever. So there's lots that they do that we could be making a lot more of. I have seen some posts recently about the conservation group. Great, they were out on Facebook. But I'd be nervous about the report in the whole. I mean, it's public, it's on the website, it's part of the agenda packs for tonight, but they're not always in context. So, you know, choosing a few specific things, I think, would be the way to go.
Okay.
Is there anything we should put out regarding the best equipment? Got control equipment?
Yeah, I think once we get it up,
Yeah, we can-
then we'll do a press release.
I just want to put it out
Yeah,
very quickly.
yeah, but that is a, you know, it's a good news, well, good news story. Unless you're a driver that's speeding, not a good news.
There you go.
It is because you get warned, you don't get caught.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
We're so kind, we just warn people.
So,
Did you, yes, that was.
So when you were talking about it, did you say sort of like about anything to press release or consultation?
Yeah, so we keep, this is, you'll see this on all the committee agendas. It's to discuss and agree any consultation or media release required. So it's twofold. Do we want to promote anything or do we want to ask people's views on anything in particular?
Okay, I was just thinking about the skate park. Like if we're saying people aren't using it in some way, and you talk about the fact they're using it on bikes, do we actually want to get people like how they're using it, understand that, so we can think about it long term? I don't know how we can go about doing that. It's just a long term style thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, I might give that some thought. I'm quite keen to talk to the young people about the skate park. There's been a few that have emailed me when the lights were, because there's an issue with the floodlights, and they weren't working for quite a while, and they were emailing me saying, fix the lights. So, yeah, I think it's worth exploring, and if we can meet a group up there as a committee, and we can go and talk to them about some of the issues. Yeah.
Are we going to do the front garden comedy? If we are,
Well,
immediately.
I was going to mention that under the town team report, that Nick wasn't here. What's happening, Alan, with Thetford in Bloom? That was supposed to be every year, and we haven't done anything this year.
He's between angry and boom.
Yeah, me too.
The
Front garden competition.
front garden, I'm not sure that anything's happened this year.
Yeah. Could we have a look at that and try and get that out there? Because we just need to recycle last year's efforts.
Wait, this to step through and wait for the work.
Yeah. This is the annual front garden competition, and we give awards to businesses for floral displays and environmental champion of the year and environmental project of the year. It's something we resurrected last year and reintroduced it, and it was very successful.
I think in principle, we ought to know many months in advance what the date is. I know we can't do it this time, we haven't got a date, but the gardens flourish at certain times of the year. I think my garden is a June garden, for example. So if it's judged at the end of July, you don't bother coming around. So, you know, it's useful for people to know if it's competitive, when it's going to be. So the long-term thing, you should be saying it's always going to be the middle of June each year or whatever.
Yep. When we adopted the report on Thetford in Bloom, we mapped out when the nomination period would be and when the judging would be. That is known. The problem is that hasn't been implemented. Now I know you're a June garden. I'll make sure it's July.
Definitely looking for an unfair advantage.
We did judge your garden last year, and you offered us a cup of tea, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, and you still didn't win.
No, no. Right. We'll get an update on that. Committee officers update to receive any update from the committee officer since the agenda was issued. None. Anybody got any further questions or comments? No. I gather because you're all here that Tuesday at 6, the first Tuesday of the month, works. Amenities used to be on a Wednesday afternoon, but we're all here, so hopefully that's a good time for everybody. That'll be the first Tuesday of July. Thank you all very much. Meeting closed. Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks.
We have